The Velvet Lounge was the kind of place where the air itself felt expensive. Located on the top floor of one of the city's grandest hotels, it was a room filled with velvet drapes, shiny golden lights, and furniture that looked too fancy to actually sit on. Every night, the room came alive with the sound of ice clinking in crystal glasses and the low, serious murmurs of people who were used to getting what they wanted. These were the city's elite lawyers, business owners, and politicians. They wore expensive suits and long, silky dresses, and they carried themselves with an air that told the world they belonged there. In the middle of all this wealth and noise moved Anna. She was 24 years old, with tired feet and a uniform that consisted of a simple black skirt and a white button-down shirt. While the guests sat in comfort, Anna was constantly moving. She weaved through the crowded tables, balancing heavy trays high above her head. Her job was to be invisible but helpful. She was there to fill water glasses that were only half empty and to clear away plates before the guests even realized they were finished. To the people in the room, she wasn't a person with a name or a story, she was just part of the background, like the soft carpet or the golden wallpaper. Anna was used to it. She had to be. The tips she made here were good, better than anywhere else in the city, and she needed every single penny. Outside of these walls, Anna had a life that was much harder than the easy luxury of the Velvet Lounge. She was a student at a local music conservatory, trying to pay for her classes and help her parents with the rent at the same time. Her days were a blur of morning classes, afternoon rehearsals, and late-night shifts here at the hotel. She was always exhausted, but she held onto a secret passion that kept her going. On this particular night, the lounge was busier than usual. A major conference was in town, and the hotel was packed with out-of-town guests who wanted to see and be seen. The atmosphere was thick with smoke and expensive perfume. Anna moved from table to table, forcing a polite smile onto her face even when customers were rude or ignored her completely. Near the back of the room, sitting in a large leather chair, was a wealthy man who was clearly celebrating a successful business deal. He had already drunk too much, and his face was red with excitement. He was laughing loudly, telling stories that nobody really asked to hear, surrounded by younger men who nodded at everything he said just to stay in his good favor. They represented a world that was very different from Anna's. They talked about stock markets and mergers, things that felt like a foreign language to her. At the front of the room, there was a grand piano. It was a beautiful Steinway, black and shiny, standing like a king over the lounge. Usually, a professional pianist played there on Friday and Saturday nights, adding soft classical music to the background, but tonight, the pianist had taken an unscheduled break. He had packed up his sheet music and walked out nearly half an hour ago, leaving the piano sitting silent and empty. The silence didn't last long. The drunk man at the back table, whom we'll call the VIP, decided he wanted to be the center of attention. He stood up, swaying slightly on his feet, and announced to his friends that he used to take lessons as a boy. He stumbled his way across the room, his laughter growing louder as he approached the instrument. The other guests in the lounge watched him with a mix of amusement and annoyance. They were trying to have quiet conversations, and this man was breaking the unspoken rules of the place. The VIP reached the piano bench and sat down heavily. He didn't adjust the seat or look at the music stand. He just cracked his knuckles and slammed his hands onto the keys. The sound that came out was terrible. It wasn't a song, it was just noise. He hit random keys, banging out a rhythm that didn't exist, laughing at his own terrible joke. Anna was standing near the bar, waiting for a drink's order to be ready. When she heard the noise, she flinched. It wasn't just that it sounded bad, it was the way he was treating the instrument. To Anna, that piano was a masterpiece. It was a tool capable of creating the most beautiful emotions in the world. Seeing this man treat it like a toy, hitting it with his fists just to get a cheap laugh, felt disrespectful. It hurt her heart in a way she couldn't fully explain. The man at the piano kept playing. He got louder and more chaotic, his friends cheering him on from their table. The rest of the room was trying to ignore it, but the mood was ruined. The elegant atmosphere was gone, replaced by the sounds of a drunk man making a fool of himself. Anna looked around the room. The other waiters and waitresses were rolling their eyes, rushing to finish their work so they could escape the noise. The guests were frowning, checking their watches, clearly uncomfortable. But Anna couldn't look away. She stood frozen for a moment, her tray weighing heavy in her hand. She looked at the piano keys. She saw the sheet music that the previous pianist had left sitting on the stand. It was a complex piece, full of fast notes and difficult rhythms, a piece by Chopin that required years of practice to master. For a second, a thought flashed through her mind. A dangerous, crazy thought. She knew that piece. She knew it by heart. She had practiced it hundreds of times in small practice rooms with dusty windows. She knew every note, every pause, and every swell of emotion. She felt a sudden, strong urge to walk over there, sit down, and show the room what that piano was really supposed to sound like. She wanted to wipe the smirk off that drunk man's face and replace the noise with something beautiful. But she quickly pushed the thought away. She looked down at her uniform. She was just a waitress, her feet hurt, her shift was far from over, and she had rules to follow. She wasn't allowed to touch the hotel amenities. The management would fire her on the spot if she sat down to play. She wasn't a guest, she was the help. She took a deep breath and turned back to the bar. The bartender placed her order on the tray, a few expensive whiskeys and a glass of white wine. She lifted the tray carefully, balancing the weight. It was time to get back to work. She needed the money too much to risk her job for a moment of pride. She walked across the room toward the VIP's table, her eyes fixed on the glasses, trying to block out the terrible music coming from the corner. She was just going to drop off the drinks, disappear into the kitchen, and pretend she didn't know the difference between noise and music. At least, that was the plan. Anna walked carefully across the thick carpet, holding the tray steady with both hands. The noise from the corner was getting worse. The drunk man wasn't even trying to play a real song anymore. He was just slamming his palms down on the low notes, creating a heavy, thumping rhythm that shook the floor. Then, he would jump his hands up to the high keys and hit them randomly, making a sharp, screeching sound. It was like a child banging on a toy, but the volume was deafening because the piano was so big and powerful. The sound filled the entire room, drowning out the soft jazz music that usually played from the speakers. The atmosphere in the Velvet Lounge had completely changed. Just 10 minutes ago, it was a place of calm sophistication. People were talking quietly about business, enjoying their expensive drinks, and acting polite. Now, the tension in the air was thick. You could feel the irritation radiating from the tables. Guests stopped talking in the middle of their sentences. Couples stopped looking at each other and started staring daggers at the piano. It was uncomfortable. Everyone in the room knew that this man was making a fool of himself, but he was too drunk to notice. His friends were still laughing, but their laughter sounded nervous now. They were glancing around the room, checking to see if the manager was coming to stop him. Anna finally reached the large round table near the window where the group sat. They were the ones who had ordered the drinks. As she stepped up to the table, the drunk man hit a jarring, discordant chord that made Anna wince. It physically hurt her ears. She had trained for years to hear pitch and harmony, so hearing something so out of tune and chaotic was like listening to someone scream. "Here are your drinks, sir," Anna said softly, placing the heavy glass of whiskey down in front of one of the younger men at the table. The man didn't even look at her. He just grunted and kept watching his boss at the piano, a nervous half-smile on his face. Another guest reached out and grabbed the wine, almost knocking it over because he was laughing so hard at the spectacle. "Hey, play some classical," one of the men shouted at the piano player, joking. "Yeah, give us Mozart," another one yelled. The drunk man at the piano laughed loudly. He had no idea how to play Mozart, and he didn't care. He just started banging harder, faster, enjoying the attention. He was acting like a rock star on a stage, but to everyone else, he looked pathetic. Anna stood there for a moment, holding the empty tray against her chest. She felt a small spark of anger deep inside her. It wasn't fair. It wasn't fair that he could treat such a beautiful instrument like a joke. It wasn't fair that he was ruining everyone else's evening just because he had money and too much to drink. She looked at the sheet music still sitting on the piano. The pages were ruffling slightly from the force of the man's banging. It was a piece by Chopin, a composer known for writing music that was incredibly difficult but deeply emotional. Anna knew this specific piece very well. It was technically demanding, requiring fingers that moved independently and with great strength. It had fast runs of notes and delicate, whisper-soft sections. It was a piece that demanded respect. The drunk man stopped suddenly, wiping his forehead with his sleeve. He looked at his friends, breathless and red-faced. "I'm amazing," he shouted, throwing his arms up. "I should have been a pro." The table roared with laughter, clapping and cheering. Anna felt a second-hand embarrassment wash over her. It was painful to watch someone be so confident when they were so terrible. She looked around the room again. The other guests were not clapping. A man in a gray suit was rubbing his temples, looking at his watch. A woman near the bar had put her head in her hands. The noise was assaulting them. Suddenly, the drunk man stood up from the piano bench. He swayed a little, grabbing the edge of the piano to steady himself. "I need a refill," he announced to his table. "Who's buying?" "I got you, boss," one of the younger men yelled back. The drunk man stumbled away from the piano, leaving the keys wide open. He didn't close the lid. He didn't put the music away. He just walked off, leaving the bench empty. The silence that followed his playing was heavy. The piano sat there in the corner, looking lonely and misused. It felt like a wild animal had just been let out of a cage, and the room was trying to recover. Anna watched him walk toward the bar to get another drink. The path to the bar took him right past her. As he walked by, he nearly bumped into her, catching himself at the last second on the back of a chair. He smelled strongly of expensive cologne mixed with the sharp smell of alcohol. He didn't apologize. He didn't even acknowledge Anna standing there. He just kept walking, pushing past her like she was a piece of furniture. That sting of disrespect hit Anna again. It was a small thing, being bumped into, but it added to the feeling she had been having all night. She felt small, she felt unseen. But standing there, looking at the empty piano bench, something shifted inside her. Her feet were tired, her back hurt, and she had 3 more hours of work left. She was supposed to go back to the kitchen, wash some glasses, and keep her head down. That was her job. But her feet didn't move. She was glued to the spot. The temptation wasn't just about the music, it was about being heard. In this room, her voice didn't matter. Her opinions didn't matter. But at the piano, she didn't need words. She didn't need to be rich or wear a fancy dress. The piano didn't care who she was. It only cared about how well she played. If she sat down, for those few minutes, she wouldn't be the invisible waitress anymore. She would be the one in control. She would be the one making the sound that filled the room. She glanced nervously toward the kitchen door. Where was the manager? She looked toward the bar. The drunk man was busy arguing with the bartender about the price of a bottle of wine. His friends were all watching him, laughing. No one was looking at the piano. The distance between Anna's table and the piano was only about 15 feet. It felt like a mile. Every logical part of her brain was screaming at her to turn around. You'll get fired, she thought. You'll make a scene. You're not dressed for this. But the music was calling to her. It was like a physical itch in her fingers. She imagined the touch of the cool ivory keys under her fingertips. She imagined the sound of the first chord, crystal clear and perfect, washing away the noise of the drunk man's banging. She took a small step toward the piano. Then another. It was a reckless, impulsive decision. It wasn't planned. It was purely emotional. She was tired of being silent. She was tired of watching people who didn't appreciate the beauty of things ruin them for everyone else. Anna reached the piano. The towering black instrument loomed over her. She stood there for a brief second, looking at the empty bench. The shiny wood reflected the golden lights of the room. She took a deep breath, pulling air into her lungs to steady her racing heart. She could feel the eyes of the room starting to shift toward her. People noticed the movement. They saw the waitress in the black skirt approaching the instrument that had just been the source of so much noise. She put her tray down on a small side table next to a decorative plant. She smoothed the front of her skirt with her hands, a nervous habit. Her palms were sweating. She sat down on the bench. It felt firm and comfortable. She adjusted her posture, rolling her shoulders back. This was a familiar feeling. This was where she belonged. The nerves in her stomach began to settle, replaced by a sudden, intense focus. She didn't look at the crowd. She didn't look at the drunk man at the bar. She looked only at the black and white keys. She placed her left hand on the low notes and her right hand hovering just above the high notes. She knew exactly what she was going to play. She wasn't going to play a polite background tune. She was going to play the piece that was sitting on the stand. She was going to play it better than they had ever heard it played before. She was going to remind this room that music was an art, not a joke. The room grew quiet. People stopped their conversations entirely. They sensed that something was about to happen. The drunk man turned around from the bar, a fresh drink in his hand, curious to see who was sitting at his piano. He saw the waitress, the girl who had served him his earlier drinks, sitting there with her back straight. Anna took one last breath. She closed her eyes for a split second to clear her mind. Then, she let her fingers drop onto the keys. The sound began, soft and steady at first, flowing like a river. She wasn't the invisible waitress anymore. She was a musician. The moment Anna's fingers touched the keys, the atmosphere in the velvet lounge shifted instantly. It wasn't a slow change, it was like flipping a switch. The air in the room seemed to stop moving for a split second. The terrible, banging noise that had been assaulting everyone's ears just moments before vanished completely, replaced by a sound that was rich, clear, and incredibly controlled. Anna didn't start with a loud bang to get attention. Instead, she began with the soft, whispering introduction of the piece. Her right hand danced lightly over the high keys, playing a delicate melody that floated like smoke over the tables. At first, people didn't know how to react. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the crystal clear notes coming from the piano. The man in the gray suit, who had been rubbing his temples in frustration a minute ago, slowly lowered his hands. He looked up, his annoyance replaced by confusion. The woman near the bar lifted her head from her hands. The sound was too beautiful to ignore. It cut through the tension and the fake conversations like a knife. Anna didn't look up. She kept her eyes fixed on her hands, but her mind was far away from the velvet lounge. She wasn't thinking about the trays, or the tips, or the rude customers. She was thinking about the music. She remembered the small, dusty practice room at her school where she had spent countless hours. She remembered the struggle of learning this specific piece, the frustration of hitting the wrong notes, and the joy of finally getting it right. All those hours of hard work, the sacrifice, and the discipline were flowing out of her fingers right now. As the music moved past the introduction, it began to grow. The melody became more complex. Anna's left hand joined in, adding a deep, rolling rhythm that gave the song a heartbeat. The sound wasn't just background noise anymore, it demanded attention. It had a pulse, an energy that made you hold your breath. The guests at the nearest table stopped eating their olives and sipping their drinks. They turned their chairs slightly toward the corner, watching the young woman in the waitress uniform. The contrast was striking. Just a few minutes ago, a wealthy man in a bespoke suit had treated this instrument like a toy. Now, a young woman in a cheap black skirt was treating it like a throne. Her posture was perfect. Her back was straight, her shoulders relaxed, and her wrists moved with a fluidity that looked almost effortless. Anyone who knew anything about music could tell that she had trained for years. She wasn't just pressing keys, she was sculpting the sound. The drunk man at the bar had stopped laughing. He stood there with his fresh drink in hand, staring at Anna with a look of total disbelief. He was trying to figure out what was happening. He had expected the waitress to maybe plink out a nursery rhyme or fumble around like he had. He certainly didn't expect this. The look on his face was a mix of shock and confusion. The smirk was gone. His friends at the table weren't laughing either. They were watching, their mouths slightly open, realizing that they had been completely outclassed. Anna let the music take her further into the piece. She started to play faster. The notes cascaded down the keyboard like a waterfall, precise and rapid. It was a difficult section, one where many students would trip up, but Anna played it without a single mistake. Her fingers flew across the keys, a blur of motion. The sound swelled, filling every corner of the high-ceilinged room. The heavy velvet curtains seemed to soak in the music, vibrating with the power of the piano. The reaction in the room rippled outward. The people at the back tables stood up to get a better view. Someone shushed a waiter who was dropping a spoon, the sound of the metal hitting the plate sounding like a gunshot in the quiet room. The usual clinking of ice and rustling of menus had ceased completely. The velvet lounge was never this quiet. Even when the professional pianist played, people usually kept talking. But this was different. This felt personal. It wasn't just that the music was good, it was the emotion behind it. Anna poured all her feelings into the keys. She played the frustration of her long shifts, the weariness of standing for hours, and the hidden hope that she carried in her heart. The music soared to a high, dramatic peak, loud and passionate, making the strings inside the piano vibrate against the soundboard. You could feel the sound in your chest. It was intense and overwhelming. The wealthy guests were captivated. They saw a young woman they had ignored all night suddenly reveal a soul that was deeper and more complex than their own. They saw the contrast between the uniform she wore and the talent she possessed. It was a humbling moment for them. They realized that while they were busy discussing money and power, the girl serving their drinks possessed a kind of wealth that couldn't be bought, a wealth of spirit and art. Anna didn't hold back. She attacked the difficult chords with passion, her body swaying slightly with the rhythm. She forgot about the fear of getting caught. She forgot about the manager. She was in her own world now, a world where only the music existed. The piano responded to her touch, singing out beautifully. Every note was clear, every tone was perfect. It was a performance that belonged in a grand concert hall, not in a hotel bar. The drunk man took a step closer to the piano, as if drawn by a magnet. He looked from the piano keys to Anna's face. She wasn't looking at him, but he couldn't look away from her. The alcohol seemed to wear off a bit as the reality of the situation hit him. He had been making a fool of himself, mocking the art form, and this girl had stepped up to defend it without saying a word. She had shamed him, not with anger, but with excellence. He stood there, awkward and silent, holding his drink like a prop. The piece was moving toward its climax. The rhythm became driving and insistent. Anna's hands moved independently, her left hand leaping across the octaves while her right hand wove intricate melodies. The tension in the music built up, higher and higher. The guests in the room were on the edge of their seats. Even the hotel staff, the bartenders, and the other waiters had stopped working to watch. They knew how hard Anna worked. They knew she was a student. But none of them knew she was this good. The music reached a point where it felt like it couldn't get any louder or faster. The room was vibrating with the sound. Anna's face was intense, her brow furrowed in concentration, but there was a beauty in that intensity. She wasn't performing for applause, she was playing for the music itself. She was doing what she was born to do. It was a moment of pure, unfiltered truth in a room that was usually filled with fake smiles and superficial conversations. As the final, crashing chords of the climax approached, Anna took a deep breath. She poured every ounce of her remaining energy into the last few measures. Her hands came down hard on the keys, filling the room with a wall of sound that was breathtaking. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the storm stopped. She pulled her hands back to hit the final, resonant chord, letting it hang in the air. She held the pose, her hands hovering over the keys, her chest heaving slightly from the exertion. The final note faded slowly, echoing into the silence of the room. It was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning humming. There was no clinking of glasses, no whispers, no movement. There was just the fading sound of the piano and the collective breath of 50 people who had just witnessed something extraordinary. Anna sat there for a moment, listening to the silence. Slowly, the spell began to break. The realization of where she was and what she had just done started to creep back into her mind. The adrenaline that had fueled her began to fade, replaced by a sudden wave of nervousness. She lowered her hands to her lap and slowly turned her head to look out at the room. The faces staring back at her were stunned. The wealthy, the elite, the people who usually looked right through her, were now looking directly at her with wide eyes and open mouths. The drunk man looked small, his face flushed with embarrassment. In that moment, the world of the Velvet Lounge had been turned upside down. The hierarchy of the room had been shattered. The waitress had become the master, and the masters had become the audience. Anna took a shaky breath, her heart pounding in her chest, wondering what would happen next. The silence that filled the velvet lounge was heavy, but it wasn't the uncomfortable, tense silence from before. It was a silence filled with shock, awe, and a sudden realization that they had just witnessed something incredible. For what felt like a long time, nobody moved. The air seemed to vibrate with the ghost of the music Anna had just played. The final notes had faded away, but the energy they left behind was electric. Anna sat on the piano bench, her hands resting on her lap. She could feel her heart thumping against her ribs, hard and fast. Her breathing was shallow. As the adrenaline began to leave her body, the reality of what she had just done started to sink in. The fog of passion cleared, and she suddenly became very aware of where she was. She was sitting at the expensive Steinway, wearing her black waitress uniform and scuffed work shoes, in a room full of the city's wealthiest people. She wasn't on a stage at her school. She was on the floor of her workplace. Slowly, she turned her head to look at the crowd. The sight that met her eyes was something she would never forget. The faces that usually looked bored, superior, or self-absorbed were transformed. The man in the gray suit, who had been so annoyed earlier, was staring at her with his mouth slightly open. He had completely forgotten about his watch. The woman near the bar wasn't hiding her face anymore, she was leaning forward, her eyes shining with unshed tears, completely captivated by the beauty of what she had heard. Even the bartenders and servers stood frozen behind the counter, looking at their co-worker with newfound respect. It started at the back, near the window. A man stood up. He didn't clap politely or quietly, he clapped with force, bringing his hands together sharply. The sound cut through the quiet room like a starter pistol. Then, another person stood up. And another. Within seconds, a wave of movement rippled through the lounge. One by one, the guests rose from their velvet seats. The applause began to grow. It started as a scattered sound and quickly built into a roar. It wasn't just polite clapping for background music. It was a thunderous, deafening ovation. The people in the room were clapping because they had been moved. They were clapping because they knew talent when they saw it, and they had just been blindsided by it in the most unexpected place. The sheer volume of the applause was shocking in a room that valued quiet dignity. It was the sound of genuine appreciation breaking through the barriers of class and status. Anna felt a blush rise to her cheeks. It was a hot, burning sensation that started at her neck and went all the way to her hairline. She stood up from the bench, feeling a little shaky on her legs. She didn't bow like a concert performer. She just stood there, holding her hands together in front of her, looking down at her feet for a second. She felt shy and exposed. She had poured her heart out, and now everyone was watching her, really seeing her for the first time. It was a terrifying and wonderful feeling all at once. The loudest reaction, surprisingly, came from the area near the bar. The drunk man and his friends had gone quiet. The man who had been banging on the piano earlier looked smaller now. The redness in his face was no longer from excitement, but from embarrassment. He looked at the cheering crowd and then back at Anna. He didn't say anything. He didn't clap. He just took a sip of his drink and looked away, unable to handle the fact that a simple waitress had completely outshone him. He had wanted attention, but he had received a lesson in humility instead. His friends weren't laughing at his jokes anymore, they were looking at Anna with admiration. The dynamic of the room had completely flipped. The applause continued for a long time. It went on for so long that Anna began to feel awkward. She didn't know how to make it stop. She wasn't used to being the center of attention. Usually, She did everything she could to blend in. So, she did the only thing that felt natural. She offered a small, shy smile to the room, nodded her head slightly as a thank you, and quickly turned back to the piano. She gently closed the fallboard over the keys, covering them with the black lid. It was a final gesture, signaling that the show was over. As she closed the lid, the applause began to die down. People started to sit back down, but the atmosphere was totally different now. The coldness was gone. The air felt warmer, more human. Anna turned to leave the piano, and for the first time, the crowd parted for her. It wasn't just to get out of her way, it was out of respect. As she walked through the tables, people stopped talking to look at her. Some of them smiled at her warmly. A few people reached out to gently pat her arm as she passed by, a silent gesture of praise. She walked past the table where the drunk man sat. She didn't look at him, but she could feel his eyes on her. She didn't need to be rude. She didn't need to say anything. Her music had spoken louder than any words could. She had proved her point without raising her voice. She felt a sense of inner peace that she hadn't felt in a long time. The anger and resentment she had been carrying around all night had melted away with the music. She felt light, almost as if she was floating. As she moved further into the room, heading back toward the service station to check on her tables, the change in how people treated her was instant. It was like magic. A man at a corner table, a regular guest who usually ignored her and complained about the service, actually caught her eye. He stopped her as she walked by. "Excuse me," he said. His voice wasn't harsh or demanding. It was soft and sincere. Anna paused, expecting a complaint about the noise or the delay. "Yes, sir," she asked, her voice a little quiet from the nerves. "That was beautiful," the man said. He looked her in the eyes, not looking through her as he usually did. "I had no idea. You have a remarkable gift. Thank you for sharing that with us." Anna was stunned. For a second, she couldn't speak. "Thank you," she whispered. I love the piano." "Well, you play like an angel," he said, and he actually meant it. She moved on to the next table. A woman in an expensive silk dress was signaling for her. Anna approached, expecting an order for more water. Instead, the woman reached into her purse and pulled out a bill. It wasn't just a single dollar bill or a standard tip. She placed a crisp, large bill on the table for Anna to take. "For you," the woman said with a kind smile. "Not for the drinks. For the music." Anna hesitated. The money was enough to cover her rent for a whole week. "Oh, I couldn't," she started to say, feeling shy. "Please," the woman insisted, pushing the money toward her gently. "You deserve it." That was the highlight of our week. Anna picked up the money, her hand trembling slightly. "Thank you so much," she said, her voice full of genuine gratitude. She continued walking through the room, picking up empty glasses and clearing tables. The work was the same, the objects she was holding were the same, but everything felt different. The guests were talking among themselves, but they weren't talking about stock markets or business deals anymore. Every conversation she overheard was about her. They were asking each other where she came from, wondering why she was a waitress, and marveling at the contrast between her humble uniform and her world-class talent. She heard words like virtuoso, genius, and incredible floating through the air. Even the other waitstaff looked at her differently. Her friend behind the bar gave her a thumbs up and a huge grin. Usually, they shared complaints about difficult customers, but tonight, the vibe was pure celebration. They knew how hard she worked, and seeing her get this moment of recognition felt like a victory for all of them. The transformation wasn't just in the room, but inside Anna as well. She felt a confidence growing in her chest. She walked with her head held a little higher than before. She realized that she wasn't defined by her apron or the trays she carried. She was an artist. She had a voice, and finally, people were listening. The weight of the elite judgment had been lifted. She had walked into the room feeling small, but she was walking through the center of it feeling large. The Velvet Lounge, usually a place of cold separation between the servers and the served, felt united for that brief moment. The music had bridged the gap. It had reminded everyone that talent doesn't care about how much money you have in the bank. The rich patrons had been humbled, and the humble waitress had been elevated. It was a powerful reminder of the magic that happens when you allow true passion to take the stage. Anna finally made it back to the service station. She put down the heavy tray of dirty glasses and leaned against the counter for a moment to catch her breath. She looked out across the room. The piano stood silent and majestic in the corner again. The guests were returning to their conversations, but the mood was lighter, happier. She took a deep breath, feeling a sense of deep satisfaction. She knew she would have to get back to work, but for now, she allowed herself to just enjoy the feeling of being truly seen. The echo of the applause still seemed to hang in the air, even though the room had gone back to a normal, hushed buzz. Anna stood behind the service counter for a moment, taking a few deep breaths to calm her racing heart. Her hands felt a little shaky, a reaction to the sudden rush of adrenaline leaving her body. She looked out at the room. The Velvet Lounge was slowly returning to its usual rhythm, but it was different now. The cold, stiff atmosphere had melted away. The guests weren't just checking their watches or looking at their phones, they were talking to each other with real excitement. Every group she looked at was animated, leaning in close to discuss what they had just heard. For a minute, Anna allowed herself to just soak it in. This was the moment she had dreamed about during all those lonely hours in the practice room. It felt surreal. She wasn't Anna the exhausted student anymore, she was the girl who had brought the house down. However, reality has a way of creeping back in quickly. She saw the floor manager, a man who was usually very strict about rules, walking briskly toward her from across the room. For a second, her stomach dropped. Was she in trouble? Had she broken a hotel policy by touching the piano? The manager reached the counter, looking serious. He looked at Anna, then at the piano, then back at her. "Anna," he said. His tone was stern. "We didn't know you could play like that." Anna braced herself, ready to apologize. "I'm sorry, sir. I couldn't listen to the noise anymore. I didn't mean to cause a scene." To her surprise, the manager's stern face broke into a rare smile. He shook his head. "Cause a scene, Anna? You just saved the night. That VIP was about to drive half our customers out of here. You handled it perfectly." He paused, looking impressed. "That was truly professional level playing. You should have told us." Anna let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. "I didn't think it mattered," she said softly. "It matters," the manager said firmly. "Listen, get back to your tables. They are asking for you specifically." "And Anna, good job." With his nod of approval, the anxiety vanished, replaced by a renewed sense of energy. She picked up her tray and headed back out onto the floor. As she walked, she realized that her job was still the same. She still had to clear tables and serve drinks. But the way she moved was different. Before, She had tried to make herself small, to be invisible. Now, she walked with her head high. Her posture was straight and confident. The apron felt lighter somehow. She wasn't hiding anymore. She approached the table where the drunk man and his friends were sitting. This was the moment she was most nervous about. How would they react? Would they be angry that she had shown them up? As she got closer, the table went quiet. The drunk man looked up at her. His face was still red, but the arrogance was gone. He looked at her with a mix of confusion and respect. He didn't say a word. He just shifted in his chair, making himself smaller, and signaled for the check. He didn't order another drink. The magic of the music had sobered him up in a way that coffee never could. He looked down at his hands, avoiding eye contact. Anna didn't gloat. She didn't smile smugly. She just cleared the glasses with efficient, gentle movements, treating him with the same politeness she would show anyone else. She had nothing to prove. The music had said everything that needed to be said. She moved through the rest of the room, and the interaction with every guest had completely changed. People who usually ignored her now stopped her to talk. They weren't complaining about the temperature of the room or the speed of the service. They wanted to talk to her. "Excuse me, miss," a man in a sharp suit called out as she passed by. He looked like someone who conducted important business meetings all day. Usually, he spoke to staff like they were robots. Tonight, he stood up to talk to her. "Yes, sir," Anna asked. "Are you studying music?" he asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. "Yes, I am at the conservatory downtown," Anna replied, feeling a spark of pride. "I'm in my third year." The man nodded slowly, looking at her with new eyes. "I have a season pass to the symphony. I hear a lot of pianists. I tell you, your technique is better than some of the soloists I paid a fortune to see. You have a gift, young lady. Don't waste it." "Thank you," Anna said, her heart warming. "That really means a lot to me." "It's not just a compliment," he insisted. "It's the truth." This conversation repeated itself in different forms all night. A woman asked if she had a CD recorded. Another couple asked if she performed at other venues. Anna found herself smiling, really smiling, for the first time in a long time. She wasn't just a waitress to them, she was a talented musician who happened to be serving them. They were seeing the human being inside the uniform. The tips were amazing, of course. When she picked up the check for the large table near the window, the receipt had a tip written on it that was 3 times the price of the bill. It was an overwhelming amount of money for her. It would pay for her textbooks for the next semester and help her parents with the electricity bill. But as she folded the paper and put it in her pocket, she realized that while the money was incredible, it wasn't the most important thing. The most important thing was the feeling of respect. Eventually, the night began to wind down. The conference guests started heading up to their rooms to sleep. The crowd thinned out. The lights in the lounge were dimmed slightly, signaling the end of the service. Anna wiped down the last table, polishing the wood until it shone. The room was quiet again, but it was a peaceful quiet now. She walked over to the side table where she had left her tray earlier. She paused for a moment and looked at the piano. It sat there in the corner, majestic and still. The lid was closed. It looked like a sleeping beast. She walked over and gently placed her hand on the smooth, cool wood. It felt like saying goodbye to a dear friend. She knew she would probably never have a moment like this in this room again. Tomorrow, she would just be the waitress again. But that was okay. Because she knew now that the piano was always there, waiting for her. And she knew that she had the power to change a room, to change minds, just by using her talent. She turned and walked toward the kitchen to clock out. As she pushed through the swinging doors, leaving the luxury of the velvet lounge behind, she felt light. The fatigue was still there in her legs, but her spirit was soaring. The heavy weight of financial stress, the feeling of being invisible, the frustration of a hard life, it all felt a little bit lighter tonight. She clocked out, said goodnight to the cleaning staff, and grabbed her bag. She walked out of the hotel and into the cool night air. The city streets were buzzing with traffic, but the noise didn't bother her. She felt a rhythm in her step, a hum of a melody in her head. She looked up at the tall skyscrapers, the lights of the city flickering like stars. Usually, she felt small in this big city, like a tiny speck that didn't matter. But tonight, she felt like she was part of the music of the city. Anna hailed a taxi. As she sat in the back seat, watching the street lights blur past, she thought about her future. It was still uncertain. She still had exams to pass and bills to pay. The road ahead was still steep and difficult. But she had a secret weapon now. She had the memory of tonight. She remembered the silence of the room when she played the last note. She remembered the standing ovation. She remembered the look of respect in people's eyes. The taxi dropped her off in front of her small apartment building. It wasn't fancy like the hotel. The paint was peeling a bit, and the hallway lights flickered. But as she climbed the stairs to her door, it felt like home. She unlocked the door and went inside. It was quiet and dark. She dropped her bag on the floor and didn't even bother to turn on the lights. She just walked to the window, looked out at the moon, and took a deep breath. "Thank you," she whispered to the empty room, feeling a sense of gratitude for her talent and for the unexpected turn the night had taken. She got ready for bed, exhausted but happy. Her hands, the same hands that had carried heavy trays all night, tingled with the memory of the ivory keys. As she closed her eyes and drifted off to sleep, she didn't dream of serving drinks or cleaning tables. She dreamt of music, of applause, and of a future where she wouldn't have to keep her talent a secret. The story of the night didn't end with her leaving the hotel, it ended with her falling asleep with a smile, knowing that she was more than just a waitress, and that tomorrow was a new day full of possibilities.